For those of you who haven't heard of it already, Crypt of the Necrodancer is an award-winning indie title on Steam, where the unique mechanic in the game is you have to move and attack to the beat of the song perfectly. I got a request from Robert Zambrano to do a recreation of this mechanic with GameMaker. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into it. Alrighty guys, so here's a quick look at what we are going to make today in this video. Just breaking this video down into simple terms, essentially we're just going to be making three different basic things. So number one, we're going to be creating grid-based movement. Number two, we're going to be creating grid-based collisions. And number three, we are going to be creating this rhythm mechanic where essentially the player and, in theory, other entities in the game can only move within the parameters of this beat that in a full-scale project you would attach to a song, exactly like you see the mechanic in Crypt of the Necrodancer. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm just going to open up my sprites here, show you guys what I have. So my player sprite is just a little basic 4-frame animation. I actually took this player from one of my previous pixel art tutorials. It was about an RPG character in 3 different styles. So I took that basic character, kind of polished it up, added a little bit of shading, and then I also added this nice little animation to go along with it, just to kind of make the video look nicer. And I was kind of bored, wanted to edit that. Just have a basic tile sprite, black square for the collision wall. Here's my rhythm bar here. And my last sprite, I have my heart that you saw beating in the example that I showed previously. Moving on to the objects, opening up the object player. In the create event, basically we're just setting a few variables here. These are all for our grid movement. Now, you have the player's X and Y location, just like in any other game. Now, there are many different ways to do grid-based movement. This is simply how I chose to do it for this specific example. I'm sure there are more efficient ways, but this is a way that gets it done, essentially. So you're setting an X position and a Y position. Now, these are actually going to operate separately from your X and Y. We'll go into this a little bit later, but this is going to allow for a smoother transition from tile to tile rather than simply jumping from one square to another very rigidly. This just kind of adds a little bit of life to it, and we'll go over that here in just a moment. Now, grid speed, this number, this 32, needs to be set to the size that you want your grid to be, that your player is going to be moving between. So my player in this example is moving between 32 by 32 tiles, and so hopping 32 to the left, 32 down, 32 right. That's what that number stands for, is essentially the distance in pixels that your player is going to be moving. And then your moving is going to be set to false. Why? Because the player is not currently moving in the create event. We'll go over that here in just a brief moment. Now, essentially what we're doing here in the step event, this is where that smooth movement comes in. So your X needs to be equal to the distance that your X position is from your actual X. And then it's not going to be perfectly moving that way. It's going to be a little bit of a delay. That's where the times 0.2 comes into play. And then same with your Y position. So we're gradually moving towards our real X, or our real X and Y position is gradually moving towards our fake X position and our fake Y position. Now, this little patch right here, this is actually a patch because if you don't have it, this won't work properly, and what can happen is your player can get stuck in a way that it can't move because it doesn't register things properly. So essentially all that this is doing is this is ensuring that if our X gets pretty close to our X position, or if our Y gets pretty close to our Y position, it's always going to snap into place perfectly, because what happens without this little patch here is it tends to be off by by a very small fraction of a number. So if your X is 0.01 away from your X position, it's kind of over and under correcting. That's basically all that this is doing here, because whenever we get here, whenever your x is equal to your x position, your y is equal to your y position, you're not going to be moving. Now, what determines moving? Well, first, this is just an emergency game end, but what determines if moving is equal to true? Well, that's going to be all of your WASD movement. Now, global.move. Global.move is a global variable that's going to be set in the rhythm meter object. We're going to go over that a little bit later. For now, we're just going to jump into this, and we'll touch on that in a bit. So if the global.move is equal to true, which global.move is simply an allowance of action, as I would put it. So in other words, whenever the beat lines up perfectly, that's whenever this allowance happens, whenever the allowance is true, and of course you don't have a collision in the way, then you're going to move and do all of these fancy things. So when the beat is happening, then you're going to be able to do all of these, all while pressing A or D or S or W. So if move equals true, and if there is not a tile wall, now I would recommend in a larger scale project, this needs to be a parent object of all of your collisions. That way you don't have to go in and program every single one, but I just have the tile wall since there's just one collidable object. Just a little piece of advice. And so then if you're moving equals false, so if you're not moving, then your X position is going to move to the left by your grid speed, which if you remember the grid speed is 32, the grid size. So the X position moves to the left while your X remains the same. And then going back to the step event, that's where this smooth movement comes in. So when it hops to the left, your actual X position is slowly moving along with it. It just has a little bit of lag behind. Now, only when you're moving left and right do we have image X scale. We don't have this in up or down just because we only have one sprite. Now, if you wanted to do, 4 different directional sprites, then you would have to do it a little bit differently, but I'm just keeping it a little simple for this example. So I have the exact same thing with D, but it's plus X because it's on the other side of the X-axis, and it's flipping the other way with the image X scale. And then I have the same, but all with Y, on the Y-axis with up and down. The only difference is that with up and down, like I mentioned, you're not flipping your X scale. So that's pretty simple. That's really all that there is for the player. And I mean, we're almost done with this. This is actually a very simple way to program this, as long as you just understand it and you know what you're doing. Now here for this tile wall, this is our collidable object. This isn't super important. I just set the depth to 1 just so the player is drawn on top and it looks nice and fancy. And then finally moving on to the rhythm meter. So this essentially, here in the create event, so what we're doing in the create event is we're setting the rhythm. So you can change this to match whatever song you're using. This is the number that you need to change, is the rhythm. Now this runs off of feet per second, so if your game is running at 60 FPS, this rhythm is going to happen twice per second, essentially. And your global move is, and now remember what this global.move is. This is an allowance for action or an allowance for movement. It's set equal to false at the very beginning of the creation of this. And then the reaction time, now this does not operate off of feet per second like the rhythm does. This operates off of more of a ratio of the distance that your bars are traveling. I won't go too much into that. Now, your positions here, your left bar and your right bar, this just refers to those to these rhythm bars right here that are kind of moving inwards towards the heart. So the left one is on the far left side of the screen, the right one is on the far right, because my view width is 640, so those are on opposite sides. Now what's happening every second is they're moving into each other. So if your left bar position is greater than or equal to, now there's probably a better way to do this. This is just how I did it for the video, just for saving time. 320, that's the exact middle of my screen. So whatever the middle of your view is, because remember my view width is 640, so half of 640 is 320. So the center of your screen essentially, minus your reaction time. So if those are true, so if your bar is coming over and then it hits this sweet spot, which is going to be causing the allowance or global.move to be equal to true, the allowance of movement. So whenever that hits that sweet spot, then global.move is going to be equal to true. And then heartbeat, this is actually just a variable that we're using for the X scale and Y scale of the heart being drawn. That gives it its kind of pulsating movement. So if that's not happening, then global move is equal to false, and the X scale and Y scale are equal to 1, which is the normal way that it is drawn. Now you could do this with the right bar, or you could do it with both, but you really only need to do it with one because they're moving in the exact same way. So just to save you on some typing, you can just use the left bar. Now here in the draw GUI event, we're going to be drawing these bars here. So we're drawing the rhythm bar and its animation frame. We're drawing it at the left bar position, and then this is just the Y position on the screen on the GUI, which for my viewport setup, this is just putting it at the bottom of the screen. Like I said, I probably could have done that based off of the actual view, but just for time's sake, I kind of went a quick way. So now we're resetting the position of that bar, of the left bar, whenever it gets to the center. So essentially, whenever the bar is moving, whenever it gets to the center, is what this is saying, then we're resetting that position to 0. So it's constantly moving and then resetting is what's happening right here. And then we're moving it with this, essentially. So remember, 320, that is the middle of my screen because 640 width divided by rhythm. So remember, if you want to change the speed, you can change it here in rhythm, and then that affects that. Now, if you want to change the sweet spot or the amount of time that you get that allowance to, hit the button. So if you want to make it easier or harder, then you're going to change this number, the reaction time. So if you want to give yourself more time to react, you would make this a greater number. If you want to give yourself less time, make it harder, you would put this at a lower number, like 60 or 30. And so we did the exact same thing for the right bar, but we did it here. And then we did less than or equal to, because remember, it's moving this way. So whenever it passes the middle of the screen, it's resetting at 640 and then resetting. And then we're doing the same thing here. Now, this is where we do that little heartbeat effect. So we're drawing the heart, the rhythm heart, at these positions, and then the image X scale and image Y scale. If you remember back in our step event, we're changing that based on whenever you need to push the button. So the heart is beating whenever you need to push the button. And yeah, that's literally all of the objects. We're almost entirely done with this. Now, just showing you my room here. Yeah, I just have some stuff set up here. Nothing crazy. Checking out the room properties. I just have a basic viewport set up. It's visible, 640 by 360, all that. It's following the player, has a border. And yeah, guys, that's literally all that there is to it. Let's go ahead and take one more look at this. So if you do want to make a game like Crypt of the Necrodancer, or even if you just want to make a basic grid movement style game, you could essentially just take all of the grid movement code that I have and just strip it down of all of the rhythm programming. And yeah, as you see, you get this really cool effect. You can't run into walls, and the player, as I have it, yeah, you're drawn in the proper orientation. And yeah, that's about all there is to it. I hope you guys enjoyed. If you found this tutorial helpful, please let me know in the comments below, and consider subscribing if you haven't already. My goal here on YouTube is just to pass on whatever knowledge that I do have, and I've never claimed to be the most impressive pixel artist or the most intelligent programmer, but really all that I want to do with this YouTube channel is just help other people learn and just enable people to make the video games that they want to make. So every subscription helps with that, and I appreciate all the subs and all the comments and all the likes that I've gotten so far. You guys are really awesome, and I've loved seeing this channel grow. I know it's not super impressive, but I'm very, very happy and very pleased and very optimistic to see where this goes. But that's going to be it for this video. I'll see you guys next week.